Go Tyler. Hi, Nordaily. What's going on, man? Nice to see you guys. Doing good. How about you? So we're just waiting for Dr. Tyler to come on, and then we're going to do this Q&A together. All right, let me try again. All right, Tyler, I just sent you the invite again. Oh, there we go. Hey, there's the man.
Boom.
What's going on, man? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, man. How's your Sunday going?
Not bad, man. Just working, getting stuff done right now. What about you? Did you go gym?
Yeah, I did some legs, ate a huge meal to hold me over, and yeah, ready to dig into some good questions.
Awesome,
I'm in
man.
the process of so many questions. I'm in the process of trying to map them all out. This is my first Q&A, so I'm trying to map out the logistics of looking at it versus having it on a screen.
Yeah, take your time. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, 1 second.
And I guess because I have the questions all here in sequential order, I'll just go through them one by one and see what you have to say, any input, and hopefully people get something good out of it.
I was thinking too, maybe, I know that there's different themes. Like I know that there's a good amount of questions about mood, depression type things. Maybe it makes sense, some magnesium questions. So maybe it might make sense to kind of go in that route.
Sure. Let's see.
The questions, I don't know. We could figure it out as we go.
Yeah, we could start with those general supplement questions. And I know you have a lot of input on that. Like there's one about vitamin D that I think you could give some really good insight into. All right. So before we even start, man, just let people know what your degrees were in, what you did for your PhD, because some people just don't know how smart you are. You worked with exosomes, you worked with flow cytometers, a lot of different tools that most people have never even heard of. So I think a lot of people would love to hear.
Yeah. So, Dr. Tyler Panzner. I literally, I think, actually yesterday, the day before, was 1 year to the date that I defended my thesis. So I've been a doctor for a year now. I don't feel any different, but got the 3 letters in front of my name. But so my thesis work, I had kind of a unique PhD experience. The first half of my PhD was focused on neuropharmacology, super interested in drugs, behavior, mood, just cognition overall. So my first half of my PhD was focused on studying, my rotation were in pretty much all the different cell types in the brain. So I did rotations in neurons, in microglia, in astrocytes. So kind of dipped my toes in all those different cell types within the brain. And then I joined a lab that was looking at the effects of oligodendrocytes. So they're the cells that wrap your neuron island in the white matter of the brain, and the roles they play in aggression and social defeat models. But halfway through, I actually ended up learning about exosomes and go forever about them. But for the viewers that may not know, they're essentially tiny little mini versions of cells. So how does a cell that's in your lungs communicate with cells that are in your brain or cells that are in your foot? They send out these little messengers, these tiny nano-sized versions, mini versions of themselves. I think of like sending mail, and that's how cells can communicate both long distance and short distance. So I actually joined a lab and kind of changed fields and was studying the role of exosomes in breast cancer metastasis and tumorology. So the second half, and that's what I actually defended my thesis on, was focused on tumor immunology, inflammation, and metastasis. But it was towards the last third or so, last half of my PhD, that I also got really interested in genetics, personalized genetics. Got 23andMe done and kind of put 2 and 2 together that you can learn a lot about yourself and optimize your personal life based on your personal genetics. So keep it as simple as, you know, how you metabolize caffeine. If you're a slow metabolizer, I can't have caffeine anything past, I don't know, 10 a.m. Otherwise, I'll be up. Some people can have a cup of coffee at 5 p.m. But the list goes on. And really, I was trained on the guy doing the pipetting. I did cell culture. I did mouse models, tumor graft mouse models, de novo mouse models of breast cancer. But I felt that I could help a lot more people, not by just being a big pharma lab guy making a new chemotherapy drug. I want to educate people on how to leverage their genetics and really optimize their health. I think healthcare overall is very focused on keeping the very sick and dying people alive another day, which is undoubtedly very, very important. Like we need those medicines. Even if everybody lived a perfect life, supplements live perfectly, people still get cancer. We still need big pharma. We still need these drugs. However, very little attention is given to the people. I mean, pretty much most of my friends, everyone I talk to around our age, they have anxiety and stuff, whether it's anxiety, depression, subclinical inflammation. So I really decided to take the route, rather than going towards the big pharma biotech route, I joined a personalized genomics company that's trying to make your genome mainstream. So whenever you go to the doctor, every healthcare decision by your physician is made based on your genetics. So the pharmacology route, and I apply that towards health based on your genetics. Obviously, genetics, you could have poor genetics and live a very good lifestyle and kind of counteract that. So it's not just all genetics. But yeah, it's really on a mission to show people you could learn a lot about your genetics and optimize your life around.
And I have a question that maybe you can clarify for the listeners, because back maybe 2 years ago, there was a lot about genetics that I did not know, and I realized how complicated genetics can be. Would you be able to explain to the listeners things like how heterozygosity works, homozygosity, and then why some genes can have promoters and be on all the time and others not on all the time? Because a lot of people believe genes are just this thing that gets read and a product is made, and that's all there is to it. But as you know so well, there's a lot of complexity to a gene.
Yeah, so just regarding the heterozygosity, homozygosity of things, so homozygous itself means, so let me rephrase it. Mom and dad each have 2 sets of chromosomes they got from their mom and dad. And you get one of their 2 sets of chromosomes by random. So the egg has 1 set from your mom and the sperm has 1 from dad. So once that occurs, you have the 2 sets of chromosomes which then form you. However, the 2 different sets can have different sets of mutations on them. So it's a 50-50 range. That's why in families, well, for example, depression, everyone says depression can run in families, which is absolutely true. And based on some of these questions, I can't wait to get into that. However, not everyone in a family always gets the depression, because the mutation that causes the depression could be on a different chromosome than the one you actually inherited. So say homozygous means you got 2 of the same set of genes from one parent. So if you were homozygous for a mutation, you have 2 bad copies of that gene, and your phenotype or how you present will be more severe than someone that's heterozygous, meaning that they have 1 bad copy of that gene. But you could go down the rabbit hole so far regarding like the biallelic expression. Not all genes are always expressed equally on each individual allele. So you can really go down the rabbit hole, what's biallelic, what isn't. And a lot of the science isn't fully caught up for all of these different genes, especially the genes that I personally focus on. A lot of genetic consulting is focused on your child has a chromosome deletion. It's embryonic lethal. Or another question on Ehlers Danlos, something like that. But I tend to focus on what makes me deprived of certain types of nutrients. So especially those that aren't they're not high on the totem pole for big pharma and clinical labs to really research, because it's not going to cure a heinous disease. It'll just make you feel better throughout the day. But in the eyes of the higher ups, big pharma, the whole Western medicine sphere, they're not really concerned with that. They're concerned with keeping the sick and dying alive another day, not making you enjoy your life as much as you can along the way through. But yeah, like I said, not every allele is necessarily expressed absolutely. Like, it's not always half this allele, half that allele. But again, the way I look at it is, I'm suggesting things like 5-HTP or magnesium or things you could go into vitamin shop and get for you to take. But the risk nearly as severe if you get it wrong. If you get it wrong, what's the worst that happens? You took some magnesium and maybe didn't need. So the really isn't as severe.
Yep, I agree with you, man. That's good. I mean, that was an awesome explanation, better than I could have done it. And it helps so people know that it isn't just a one gene, one consequence kind of thing. There's pleiotropy that plays in almost every condition. But all right, I guess we should hop into the questions. And the idea that I have in mind is, I bring a question up, you answer, and then you bring a question up that interests you. We both have some inputs on it, and we go back and forth like that.
You go first, then I chime in, or you want to do?
Yeah, so like, I'll bring up the question, you chime in first, I'll see if I have anything to put, and then you bring up the next question.
Cool.
Awesome. So the first one I got, which I think is actually really important to go over, is what's the deal with supplementing vitamin D? Is it as harmful as some claim? So are you familiar with the whole vitamin D discussion about it being harmful?
I've heard it, meaning, are you talking about with the diagnostic testing of not the correct active metabolite?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I haven't followed it super closely, but I do know people are saying that could be an issue. But I know what I'm going to say about that, so I'll let you kind of take that first.
Yeah, so I had a highlight devoted to this way back. The argument comes from Jim Stevenson, I think his name is, who discussed it with Matt Blackburn. And they discussed that the 125 hydroxy form of vitamin D, which is the one that gets hydroxylated in the kidneys, is the active form, which I totally agree. That's what induces gene expression changes, produces antimicrobial peptides, and so on. And that when labs measure the 25 hydroxy, the one that's made in the liver, that is not an accurate measure of vitamin D. When that's elevated, that is not a good sign that there is disease present. What you really want to check is 125 hydroxy. And I can grant that that may be the case, but nonetheless, every step of vitamin D synthesis plays a role in cell response. In my opinion, I've seen effects from even the precursor 7-dehydrocholesterol before it even becomes vitamin D, acting on cell dynamics. And if we just focus on the last metabolite, it's not really doing it justice.
Interesting. So you're saying, just so I'm understanding, you're saying that the precursors to the active D, them themselves are actually having their own distinct cellular response. That's really interesting. I'm actually not too familiar with that. I always kind of focus on the final active product. That's really interesting. What were some of the what are some examples of precursors or what? So
when the 7-dehydro gets radiated by UV light and it becomes pro-vitamin D3, it can reverse its own catalytic product back to a reactant, 7-dehydrocholesterol, which prevents vitamin D toxicity. And so if you get vitamin D from the sun, you'll never have toxicity events because of that retroconversion going back and forth, back and forth. That was one of the things that stuck out the most to me. Unlike if you just consume vitamin D, there's always a chance that you acquire more than you need, fat-soluble toxicity sets in.
Yeah, so what's the main argument here? People are saying that it's deleterious to be supplementing with the active final metabolite, or that we don't evolve to not really need it?
No, that we shouldn't supplement with 25-hydroxy D3, otherwise known as just supplemental vitamin D3.
And what do they propose as the alternative?
Just sunlight. And if you need a UVB light machine, that would work as well.
Yeah, so from my end of this, I actually had a personal story with vitamin D. I actually did a post about it fairly recently. And this is another great example of how I view personalized medicine with regards to personalized health optimization. Is the enzyme that does the conversion into the pre-D3 precursor from the 7-dihydro, so much better with the chemistry name. the precursor, the
Yeah.
7, whatever. So I actually have SNPs. I'm heterozygous, so not homozygous. So I have
Okay.
one copy of that enzyme, which means roughly half of my enzymes that activate, that create pre-D3, the precursor, due to sunlight, is non-function or functioning
Oh,
far.
that's interesting.
I love the beach in the summer. I love being outdoors, and I was super tan, bleached blonde hair, in the sun all the time. Felt really just crappy with inflammation problems, and my active D3 levels were super, super low. So that's one of the things that led me down this rabbit hole. And I fully disagree with some people. Let me back up. So the TLDR here is, no matter how much sunlight I get, my body will not create enough of the D3 precursor due to the UVB radiation. So that's pretty far downstream the whole process here. So that means if I'm not even getting pretty much the upstream precursor, then downstream everything else is going to be all messed up. So I fully disagree that some people, if they have mutations in vitamin D pathways, they're going to need vitamin D supplementation. I actually also have mutations in the binding protein. So I make less of the precursor, and my enzyme that carries it through the blood, the binding protein that carries it through the blood, is less able to latch onto it. So I get less to my cell tissues. And on top of that, I have mutations in the nuclear enzyme that vitamin D binds to. So even if you were to assume, let's assume I only had that third mutation. Even if I had normal levels of vitamin D3, I need higher than normal levels because my cells, the nuclear receptor, isn't as responsive for it. So I definitely think that, in a perfect world, a lot of people talk about vitamin D, but it's super, super personalized. I personally take 10,000 IUs every day, year round. And of course, I take it with K2 and magnesium, which are really important for the activation processes. But in the winter too, sometimes if I'm feeling a little down, I'll do 20,000 for a week or so. And, I miss a day or here or there, not a huge to do, but I know it's a huge improvement in my overall mood, sense of inflammation by getting those levels checked. And I tell people, I think they say for every 1,000 IUs, you bump up around 10 nanograms per milliliter. Long story short, that 1,000 IU little gummy you're taking, it may not be doing much. You got to get checked before you supplement to make sure that that'll tell you you're low, but then after as well. It takes 4 to 6 weeks for it to respond to supplementation. So you really need to make sure. You may take 1,000 IUs and you're still deficient in it. It only bumped it up a little bit. So you don't want to be throwing darts in the dark. But yeah, I definitely think vitamin D is one of my favorite supplements. I recommend it to virtually everybody. If you don't have these mutations and you're in the sun a lot, sure, it may be unnecessary. But all the global, viral onslaught going on, the higher end of normal is recommended for these antiviral effects as well.
Yep, I totally agree with you. I think that's a really good way to put that. Give it a shot. Your turn.
Yeah, my turn. Let's see. So many good options. Let's see. Was there another one about vitamin D here? No.
Not that I've seen.
So power of drinking magnesium bicarbonate first thing in the morning. So first thing I think reading this is magnesium bicarbonate isn't a very well absorbed form of magnesium. However, the bicarbonate could help with acidity. So if you're having issues with acidity in your body, in your gut, the bicarbonate portion could actually help that. But I tell people for magnesium, you want high bioavailable forms. Magnesium oxide isn't really good. I personally utilize Bioptimizers. They have a blend of several different types. So different cell types have different affinities. They have different rates of uptake for different functional groups on that magnesium molecule. Magnesium tartrate is especially taken up well by cardiac cells for your heart. Magnesium glycinate and threonate are very good for your brain. Glycinate is good for your muscles. So having a blend like that really covers all of your bases. Because if I personally was taking magnesium first thing in the AM, again, I love the blend that Bioptimizers has, but also I'd probably be taking, if I had to pick one and not that blend, I think the blend is good, great, but glycinate is pretty cheap and it's very highly well absorbed, especially in the brain. And you got to think of magnesium. I guess this also ties in. No, I'll let you say what you have to say about this. A lot of these questions have a lot of
overlap. Yeah, so you mean like with magnesium being the cofactor for vitamin D, right? Conversion. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I agree. I think the one of the most interesting part about all of this is magnesium's role in DNA polymerase, the enzyme that one replicates DNA and proofreads. So if we have genetic mutations de novo, magnesium is actually one of the cofactors in this. And it doesn't matter what form of magnesium somebody takes, as soon as it gets inside of the cell and goes into the nuclear envelope, it becomes magnesium 2 plus charge ions. And so a lot of people focus really heavily on only taking one form of magnesium, but they forget that afterwards it becomes a magnesium ion as the cofactor in a lot of the catalytic sites of enzymes. So if they weren't even focusing on magnesium bicarbonate and just taking the worst of them all, magnesium oxide, at least they're getting some to help with the process. But I agree, magnesium bicarbonate is great. It's going to be made in the body anyways once it comes across a bicarbonate group. And I think if somebody was to hyper focus on magnesium, I would say that person should focus to, well, see if they have genetic mutations that make them unable to absorb magnesium effectively, and then use the one that's most appropriate for them.
Well, that as well. Also, I know that like leafy greens are a good source of magnesium, and a lot of, just simply put, our world today, there's more toxins in the air that we breathe in than things, and the food we eat is sprayed with pesticides or the soil quality. It's all about mass output. That the foods that, let's say, used to be this healthy, now those same foods are this healthy. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
just overall, we're not getting much bang for a buck for the food we eat, and
I
that's
agree.
why I preach to people. The cards are stacked against us. Unless you're really living off the grid in bumblefuck, you know, you're caught on an island somewhere. Can't wait for that stage. Hopefully I get there eventually, you know, but like these things around you are going to be dragging you down. So that's why you
I
need
agree.
to try doing these things. Like, why is everyone's gut messed up? The things we breathe, the things we eat, it's all stacked.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I had a question relating to that with gut. I think somebody asked, is gluten free a like is it really necessary, or is it just kind of like pseudoscientific? I think you have a great lot of research on gluten free diets and what gluten does. So I think you should chime in on that, because there's people that don't even know the non-celiac gluten intolerance that people have.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably one of my main MOs that I'm super, super vocal about. And simply put, human beings did not evolve to ingest gluten. And how can I say that so surely? We lack the enzymes to properly break down gluten. So the mechanism of it, the undigested gluten can activate zonulins, which can dissociate the tight junction. So they're the little linkages between your gut cells. So imagine you had gut cells, your gut's up here, and then this is your bloodstream where you absorb nutrients.
Yeah.
Absorb it through the cells like that, but these linkages get weakened by gluten, and then you're getting a bunch of stuff that shouldn't be in there. Undigested food, bacteria, fungi, mold possibly, all these different things. And that's what leaky gut is. When the gut gets permeable like that,
Right, right.
little foods in. And that occurs, I would wager that occurs in everybody. Now, the difference is, though, your genetics, your environment, how badly does your immune system respond to that? So you could have, let's say the gluten gets in, you have an autoimmune reaction, and the autoimmune reaction attacks your gut. Then you'll have celiac disease. And for anyone who wants to learn more, I've done multiple posts about this, breaking it down. But essentially, you could have different autoimmune reactions to different organ types. You could have the autoimmune reaction. Me personally, I have gluten. I get neuroinflammation. I get very foggy, very lethargic. I have a weird itchy eye sensation. I just feel very out of it and not
That's
myself.
interesting.
And one day of not having gluten, I instantly feel so much better. It'll carry on the whole day if I have like that. And they're actually showing that most people actually that have gluten allergies, not allergies, gluten issues,
Intolerance.
they actually don't get GI upset from it. So celiac is just the tip of the iceberg for all this. I literally, one of my buddies, he texted me last night. He had Hashimoto's disease, and I've had multiple of my friends that approach with Hashimoto's disease. For those of you that don't know, that's an autoimmune reaction towards your own thyroid. So you have hypothyroidism due to an autoimmune reaction, and you'll have like nodules from growth due to that, onslaught or attack from your own body. 3-4 of them, they got rid of gluten, and the nodules shrunk and they improved drastically. And he actually texted me saying, hey, I told my mother she's had metaplasia in her gut, so her gut cells differentiated permanently into the wall. She had 5 different autoimmune diseases, he said, and he told her what I've been saying about gluten. And what do you know? She got tested, and she had super high levels of antibodies, diagnosed with celiac disease. You know, she's an older lady. She lived her entire life and got all these immune diseases, autoimmune diseases. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you they're definitely all because of gluten. If she didn't have gluten, she wouldn't have any of them. Like, I can't make that claim. However, all the autoimmune diseases she had, you look in the literature, and they've been shown to have reduced severity when you remove or reduce gluten. So it's kind of like if someone proves A causes B and someone proves that B causes C, you don't necessarily need someone to prove
that A causes C. Yeah.
Kind of infer there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I challenge everyone, try going gluten-free for even 1 to 2 days. A week would be great. And I think it'll dramatically improve many people, nearly everybody, even if it's just a minor, you know, a little more energy. Again, not everyone is super sensitive. I'm super sensitive. My body's a little bitch with gluten. I have my optimizers too. They have a gluten digestive enzyme. So whenever I'm not sure if I ever have to have some gluten,
you take that.
If I gotta have a tortilla, I'll have that with it because it's just not worth knocking myself off because of that. But in a nutshell, gluten affects absolutely everybody that ingests it. The question is, you may be used to living. Most people are used to living in inflammation their entire life. How many memes do you see about people joking about being tired all the time? It's almost like glamorized or like joked about because it's like, haha, look at me. I'm always tired no matter how much I sleep. I see that and I'm like, bro, you're inflamed and you're lacking micronutrients. You know, that's how it's supposed to be. But yeah, I challenge everyone to try getting rid of some gluten for a couple of days, see how much better you feel. Definitely an uphill battle, but
there's a lot. There's some comments on here about people saying that it's possibly chemicals and retinol and copper. And I can tell you from personal experience, it is not just that. Gluten as a protein is really detrimental to the tight junctions. You can strip the entire in vitro, the entire set of confounding variables of glyphosate, whatever it may be, and put just gluten peptides inside of the cell culture, and you see the cells come apart, like desmosomes, the hemidesmosomes. They're completely destroyed. So the only possible factor here for some of these detrimental effects has to be the protein itself. So I don't know. A lot of people have different opinions, but based on what I've seen, gluten is just as a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely absolutely agree. Glyphosate is sprayed on pretty much everything. It's aerosolized in the air that we breathe now. Like, no matter where, it's everywhere. And I definitely think that'll contribute to it. But again, why would you be having antibodies? You could go get tested for antibodies to the different gluten molecules. There's multiple different types you could get tested for. If it wasn't a gluten-specific thing, then these antibodies wouldn't
be making antibodies.
Just point. And, you know, it's a very, very wide spectrum, and it's very variable. Like, some people will have these gluten issues but not have antibodies. So it also is not guaranteed, like, super concrete like that. So I definitely think glyphosate contributes as well. But again, if it wasn't just due to the gluten, you wouldn't be having those antibody titers.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's your turn this time.
Oh, it is. Let's see. Ways to optimize cognitive performance and mood, not necessarily supplements. So, me, pharmacologist, cell biologist, I've approached biohacking initially from the supplement side. What can I take to do that? There's some other questions about that we'll be diving into, but regarding just activities themselves, definitely I'm a huge fan of early morning sun exposure. I think that I can literally feel myself. I'm very prone to inflammation. Part of that is what made me learn so much and get so good at getting to the root cause, because I've had to fix myself. So some mornings when I used to live in a basement apartment with no natural lighting, and I would wake up just feeling inflamed. And in the summers, when I lived in New York, it wasn't nice all the time. Even just going for a quick walk in the morning, a 5-8 minute walk with the sun, I just feel
a lot better.
the inflammation go away. Now, you know, could there have been some environmental stuff in the basement apartment, sure. You know, it all comes from somewhere. But at the end of the day, that morning exposure really makes a huge difference for me personally. How about you?
Yeah, that is definitely a big one. And if you're going to have morning exposure, you need to plan the night before, because you can't go to bed at 1 a.m. and expect yourself to feel good at like 6 a.m. waking up with the sun. So for me, what I was going to mention in regards to this question was having the proper sleep rhythm, which I have been horrible about the past week, and I feel it. So I think that if somebody can just have a consistent sleep schedule where they go to bed before 12 a.m., that would be ideal. I know some people's schedules, sometimes you can't, but at least before 1 a.m. the most, because there is research that suggests that even if you get the same amount of sleep, if you do it at an earlier time period and then wake up with the sun, your body benefits so much more. Cell regulatory processes are much more accentuated in the right manner. Circadian rhythm based genomic approaches suggest that if you match a natural circadian rhythm, as we've done for hundreds of thousands of years, it helps regulate things properly. So that's my approach to that.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I've been trying to get my sleep schedule fixed as well. You wake up later, you
Yeah,
these things, and I've been trying to be a morning person my entire life.
it's
And
difficult.
I've done the 5 a.m. wake up, 5:36. I've done all that. It's always like 3, 4 o'clock when things come on, and then by 10 o'clock, I'm just like
You're done.
really this
Yeah.
stuff. But definitely want to try and get it earlier, because again, it's evolutionarily conserved. You
Consistent.
know what I mean? I think some people take the evolutionary side of things a little too far with certain things, but I think this is definitely one of those that
Yeah.
definitely.
I think there's also some uh, research on like just prokaryotes. They follow a circadian rhythm based approach too. Like there's certain genes that turn on during the night versus during the daylight hours. I just don't remember what they were, but basically saying, yeah, even in different domains of life, this is a big deal.
Yeah. And then someone mentioned here, not looking at screens post sundown.
Yeah.
Totally. Blue light, spiking up cortisol, suppressing melatonin secretion. I use blue blockers. I actually have a mutation in my melatonin receptor that makes me more sensitive to these blue lights. So that blue light effect is even more
Oh, that's fascinating.
for me. Also, having blue eyes on average makes you more sensitive to light. So
Right.
that's huge as well. I'm going to try and get like a dim red light to have in the bedroom around nighttime. But it's hard. It's really hard, because you do good for a couple of days, and then one day
Yeah.
something to do or whatever, and then it throws it all off. It's tough.
All right, so the next question is by my buddy over here, Wolf's Law Fitness, and he asked a pretty interesting one that is controversial, but I have some stuff to say about it. I'm sure you could too. Genes, IQ, and crime. How does genetics relate to IQ, and how does genetics relate to crime?
You first.
I guess I'll take the hit. All right, so based on what I know, there are clear genetic conditions that correlate with increased susceptibility to, one, traumatic events, and then two, a response to those traumatic events that would be categorized as something that is just basically crime. One of them is monoamine oxidase enzymes, and when you have a mutation in them, you can respond unfavorably to traumatic events in such a way that your aggression levels increase. The other one that I know is when you have XYY syndrome, so double Y for the male chromosome, you are more aggressive. And there is counter research that says this is not necessarily the case, but a majority of it suggests that males with double Y chromosomes are criminals more often than not, serial killers, and also more prone to aggressive tactics. So in my opinion, it plays a huge role. And then as it relates to IQ, that is one that I haven't looked into, but there's obvious side effects when you are missing even one gene for neurotransmitters. And a perfect example is when you have trisomy. Any kind of trisomy tends to correlate with neurodegenerative disorders. Down syndrome is a perfect one, trisomy 21. So there's clear overlap between genes, IQ, and crime, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of summing up what you said there was monoamine oxidase genes absolutely tied to aggression. And the way I look at genes associated with IQ, usually it has to do with the levels of synaptic neurotransmitters. So mutations that will elevate synaptic neurotransmitter levels, monoamine oxidase is one of them, having that loss of function. So to go a little further, monoamine oxidase is the enzyme that breaks down serotonin and catecholamines. So uh, and norepinephrine, I believe, right? Norepinephrine. Yeah, those three. So that means, and it's another gene I'll bring in here too, the COMT gene. These are my two favorite genes to talk about because they're ones that have dramatic effects on your personality, your behavior, your IQ, your aggression. COMT is very similar to monoamine oxidase, MAO, in that it metabolizes just the catecholamines. So just dopamine, norepinephrine, but not serotonin. So I actually have this mutation, a loss of function for the COMT enzyme. And
I see.
Shown to, so if I metabolize dopamine slower, that means I'll have on average higher levels than normal. This is a double-edged sword though. It's not all sunshines and rainbows. It's under normal conditions, it equates to higher IQ, higher excitement. I'm very excited about things, sometimes too much. I have this idea and I run with it. I get so excited and then I have all these ideas. I don't know what to do with them. Good sometimes, good bad times, sometimes bad, but also if things don't go my way, what also elevates catecholamines instead of aside from video games and, you know, gambling, whatever things with dopamine, stress and anxiety elevate. So when I get stressed, I have a very hard time clearing that excess catecholamines in my brain. And that would be similar to people with monoamine oxidase mutations. So I'm not sure with COMT related to crime, but I know MAO does that as well. I would think monoamine oxidase could also equate to IQ. So, and then also one that wasn't mentioned yet is oxytocin gene mutations. So mutations of the oxytocin receptor. So oxytocin is different from serotonin. This is more so the social connection, the bonding, the empathy. It kind of gets intertwined with serotonin. Serotonin is more long-term contentness and satisfaction with your place in the world, in this universe. Oxytocin is when you have sex, when you really bond closely with somebody. But people that have mutations in those genes, in that gene, that receptor, I'm pretty sure virtually every major serial killer had oxytocin gene mutations because it is hardcore psychopathy, sociopath, like narcissistic type traits because you simply lack the compassion with other human beings. There's no connection. They've done studies, these people with these mutations, they have a very hard time reading facial cues. So let's say you're in a social environment, you're talking or doing something, you're not going to be able to read that the person you're talking to is like uncomfortable. You may not be able to pick up on those cues because it doesn't mean that everyone with these mutations, you know, is going to be a serial killer or anything. It just so happens that virtually all of them that do have this. And I'll make that clear to people. Genetics, you know, it's not always a hardcore death sentence. And like Pedro mentioned, it's not just monogenic things. There's so many things involved with this. But yeah, I think those definitely relate to crime as well. And then I know also similarly things related to acetylcholine levels. So mutations in the acetylcholinesterase enzyme. You'll have lower levels of acetylcholine, which make it harder for learning and memory, therefore IQ. So related to neurotransmitter levels. I'm curious to see what non-neurotransmitter gene, how that could affect it, but a lot of those are heavily involved.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, so from here, going off of this, sort of best thing for anxiety supplements-wise. So as we were saying, these different mutations can make you more prone or less prone to anxiety. I dealt with some really bad anxiety initially in the beginning of my PhD. And like I said, I'm always prone to be more anxious in scenarios. I've done a lot of work on myself and I know my body, so it doesn't happen too often anymore, but I get frazzled instantly. So best things anxiety-wise, supplement-wise, I actually just launched ICOM. So it's literally a 5-hour energy, basically, with 100% natural ingredients that calms you down. So www.icom.com, or the link is in my bio. You can see that. That has taurine, GABA, lemon balm, and and L-theanine. So all 4 of these, I think, we picked these. I formulate this. I picked these because they work very, very well for anxiety. So whether you want to try out ICOM, it's great. It's portable because you just take one quick drink and that's it. You could bring it with you places, not fuss with pills or powder. But honestly, I think any of those ingredients that were put into ICOM are all very, very good for anxiety. Got a ratio that really makes it work well without putting you to sleep with it. But also another big one is magnesium. I know we already touched on that. The reason why there's no magnesium as ICOM is magnesium tastes like shit, even low doses, and we really wanted to make it taste good. So yeah, those four. Magnesium is really good. And yeah, I mean, just knowing your body and knowing what your triggers may be. And I'm also a huge fan of CBD as well. That can really work well. However, one thing that's not really talked about, CBD inhibits the CYP enzymes, the cytochrome enzymes. So CBD affects the metabolism of virtually every prescription.
That makes sense.
And I think a lot of people don't really know that. People don't talk about that. It's sold over the counter. You're trying to kick, let's say, your Xanax, and you go on CBD, you're going to be increasing the effective dose of your Xanax as you're trying to wean off, because you're taking CBD to wean off the Xanax. So you think you feel better, but it's because you're overdosing or excessively dosing yourself at night. Wow, the CBD is really slapping. It's like, yeah, you have CBD in your system, but you're also jacking up the effective dose of your Xanax.
That's interesting. I did not know that about CBD. That is good to know, actually. Huh. I got one here. It's in relation to Epstein-Barr virus and how to stop it from inducing multiple sclerosis. Have you seen the Nature paper? I think it was Nature. The recent paper about you saw it, so you know what's going on. Epstein-Barr virus it has always been implicated as the root cause of multiple sclerosis, but they weren't sure about it. And so they created autoantibodies to Epstein-Barr virus, and the multiple sclerosis went into remission, if I'm not mistaken, right? Is that the finding of that paper?
Yes, and I think I forgot the percentage that they said. It's similar to what we were saying about the mutations. Like, not every person is a serial killer, but most serial killers have these mutations. It's like not every person with MS had Epstein-Barr virus, but a suspiciously very high correlation of people with Epstein-Barr virus eventually developed MS.
Yep. And I think it's at least one of the root causes of multiple sclerosis, especially because 95% of the total world population gets Epstein-Barr virus at some point in time. So how do you get rid of it? Well, I'm sure you have some input on this, but one of the ways that I think you should work against Epstein-Barr virus is, one, getting proper sleep schedule and reducing stress as much as possible, because it seems to be a hitchhiker virus in that it responds based on your current physiological state. And so if you're sleep deprived and you're always stressed out, it hyperactivates. Then focusing on an herbal protocol to reduce the viral activity, inhibiting the polymerase enzymes that would basically increase its own transcription. That might help, but at the same time, it would affect your own cell division process. So it's a very specific approach, and I can't give a clear-cut answer on this, but the number one thing I would say is reduction of stress.
And now, don't they also have some treatments that do sort of like a bloodletting type thing with that as well, to try and like thin out? It may not be the exact word, but I think I remember reading somewhere that, or reading on Instagram or whatever, that they'll kind of help remove some of the blood that can have some of it, something like that. I'm gonna be totally honest. This seems more up your domain. Like, I read that paper, but Epstein-Barr virus itself, honestly, gonna,
Gotcha.
Yeah. If I don't really know it in depth, I'm not going to speak too much on it. You're definitely more knowledgeable in that realm than me, but reduce stress, sure, that fixes.
That's a big one. Yeah. The only other thing I can say is Berner's protocol for viral diseases is a good one. Harold Berner, if anybody's listening and probably has heard of him, he's one of the botanist and plant biologist that has looked into many of the herbs and their uses for medicinal properties. And he has a whole book on antiviral approaches with herbs. So I would recommend reading his book.
Someone actually said this in the comments, and we actually have a question here about ashwagandha. So thoughts on ashwagandha supplementation for testosterone, okay to cycle or stay away? So ashwagandha, personally, I'm not a fan of it at all. I also saw someone mention excess cortisol, what to do. Ashwagandha lowers cortisol. So for whoever mentioned to lower cortisol, maybe might want to check out ashwagandha. I personally like taurine can also lower cortisol, which I usually respond better to. But ashwagandha overall, when I supplemented with it, I felt almost too calm, too chill. I felt very apathetic towards life, just very kind of flat. Like I imagine when people say, I don't take an SSRI, people say SSRIs kind of just make you very monotone and kind of zombie-like. That's what I felt like on ashwagandha. And honestly, even higher doses of taurine, I'm personally very, very sensitive to things that directly lower cortisol. Even if it's low doses, it really makes me just feel just super, super flat overall. And regarding for testosterone, I mean, is there data with testosterone? I honestly kind of looking into ashwagandha too much when I personally I didn't do well on it. So I didn't really put more resources into learning more about it. But regarding things for testosterone, personally, I mean, boron and shilajit are two things. I know you're big on shilajit. Those both work very, very well to not only elevate total testosterone from upstream downwards, but also to lower sex hormone binding globulin. So that'll actually increase the free or active or functional testosterone as well. You could have super high testosterone, but low free testosterone, and the free is the only thing that does something. So you may be wasting or have a lot of your testosterone be ineffective. Me personally, I don't like ashwagandha. Some people says it works great for them, so it's kind of one of those, I guess, mess around to see if it works. But maybe you could speak more about the testosterone side of it. I'm not too
sure. I just looked at a pretty large body of literature literally yesterday and the day before on ashwagandha. And it does increase testosterone. It does it pretty well. And I don't know the mechanism by which it does it, but it seems to be in response to lowering cortisol, which kind of makes sense. As you lower cortisol, the androgenic hormones increase as a byproduct of that. So
because they're sharing the same precursors.
Possibly.
That
could be one of the mechanisms by which it does it. But at the same time, that hypocortisol state is something I've experienced with ashwagandha as well, which is why I don't use it regularly. If not, honestly, it's been a while since I have. But it is still helpful for anxiety in my personal experience. All right. Let's see. We got one on, where is that one? Ways to reverse telomerase decay. I thought this was an interesting one.
Yeah.
You want to?
Ever.
All right, so I guess I'll input on that. But basically, primer on telomerase. It's an enzyme that helps extend telomeres. When your DNA is coiled up into chromosomes, the ends of them are what your telomeres are basically, and they shorten every time your cell undergoes cell division. If telomerase is present, it can build back that telomere shortening, and so it extends the Hayflick limit of cells, basically how much a cell can divide before it becomes a senescent cell, an old cell that has no utility in the body besides increased inflammation. The thing is, as you increase telomerase activity, you also increase the chance for cancer development. In fact, cancer cells have telomerase active pretty much at all times. That's why they're an immortal cell line, alongside many other factors that I can bring up, but it's not a cancer biology class. So I don't think it's ideal to reverse telomerase activity, but rather prevent the rapid shortening of telomeres. And one of the ways to do that is just have a asymmetric or symmetric replication of stem cells over and over, so that you always have a baseline level of stem cells that can provide for those niche cells. So for example, if you have telomere shortening of hematopoietic stem cells, that's bad because then the stem cells are going to become senescent. But if there's asymmetric cell division where they increase stem cells and the telomere hasn't shortened, at least you have a backup that can improve your physiology. The thing with that is that gets into stem cell therapy, and that is not usually something that most people have an opportunity to implement because it's costly and it's also moderately illegal here in the United States. That's my input on that.
Yeah, I mean, I know kind of what I was joking about before. That's actually true. Limit your stress. I know. I read a study that was showing doing the effects of meditation, and they measured telomerase activity of the meditation versus the control group. And basically, the meditation group actually had increased telomerase activity.
That's fascinating.
That kind of links to other papers have shown that overexposure to catecholamines, so the stress hormones, can actually reduce the telomerase activity. And I know as well, just overall inflammation itself just kind of messes everything up, and that includes telomerase. So I know it sounds super cliche, but limiting stress and reducing inflammation that are kind of stress in of itself can cause inflammation out of nowhere, which I find fascinating. Normally it stems from somewhere, but the excessive catecholamines, I guess through a similar mechanism why it modulates telomerase activity, can initiate, I guess, a mini cytokine storm just from the stress in catecholamines.
Yeah, that's fascinating to consider.
Let's see. So, are all amino acids created Are all amino acids created equally? Does it matter which brand I buy? So, amino acids themselves, I think it honestly depends on what the goal is per se. Most people supplement amino acids, at least I do. I've been bodybuilding my whole life. I'm focused on muscle building, muscle protein synthesis, inhibiting catabolism, but also amino acids, tyrosine, tryptophan, these are also used for precursors to make serotonins in your brain. So definitely are all amino acids created equally? Definitely not. Each amino acid can do dramatically different things in your body. Like I said, tryptophan can make serotonin. Leucine is very anabolic towards muscle cells. I guess I can speak a little towards more the side of weightlifting, physical fitness. You want higher amounts of certain types of amino acids. So leucine, isoleucine, valine, these amino acids are more, they're actually incorporated into muscle tissue. So a lot of people will debate animal protein versus plant protein, and it's been shown you can get muscle growth with plant protein. However, you're going to need much more of it, because if you really want to break it down, it's the amount of these very, I guess, anabolic amino acids that are incorporated and used for muscle protein synthesis that really matter. And to go one step further, at least for gym supplementation for health and fitness, you have branched chain amino acids, BCAAs, and essential amino acids, EAAs. Now, EAAs, they're amino acids your body cannot produce on their own. They're essential. You have to get them from the diet. Branched chain amino acids include some that your body can create on their own. And EAAs were all the rage several years ago, saying they help grow muscles, this and that. And papers have actually come out and shown BCAAs don't promote muscle growth. They prevent muscle wasting. So if you're cutting, trying to lean out, BCAAs can help you hold on to muscle when you're in a hypocaloric state. However, the EAAs, those have been shown to actually be anabolic and help you grow new muscles, grow bigger muscle tissue, bigger muscle fibers. So me personally, I use from Primeval Labs. They have a EAA and BCAA like blend that's 2-to-1. So 2 parts EAAs to 1 part BCAAs. That's what I personally take. But are they all created equally? Definitely not. And again, it's hard to fully answer this if we're talking about, a neurology mood standpoint or a muscle building fitness standpoint.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective on how context matters a lot when it comes to amino acids. And the only thing I can put input relating to that is to be careful with just taking the branched chain amino acids by themselves regularly, especially if you're not exercising, because they can be insulinogenic and increase insulin response, and then you gain weight.
Yeah, and then piggybacking off of that also, you'll also be competing. There's only a limited amount of amino acids entering to the CNS. So brain. So if you're constantly flooding your body, I'm not going to lie. When I first heard about BCAAs, when I was back in high school, getting into weightlifting, I was slamming those things all day. They taste great, all this and that. But as I've learned more, you can put yourself into a mild state of depression, because if you're ingesting so much of these BCAAs that don't include that don't include tryptophan, which is used for serotonin, you'll basically be out competing for your natural serotonin production in your brain if you're always drinking these, because there's a limited amount of entry that go into that.
That's actually interesting to know, because when I have done higher protein intake, lower carbohydrate intake, and so I get a lot more of the methionine, less glycine, more of the aromatics in general, my mood is more dysphoric. I'm less excited about things. I'm more monotone, but not in a depressive sense, just more stable. It's interesting to consider too, because I have read anecdotes of people that have done the carnivore diet. What they feel is a more stable mood. I wonder if that's one of the reasons for that.
And it's kind of more like the highs are a little lower and the lows are a little higher. So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
not flat per se, but just more stable, not so erratic.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
That's interesting. Is it my turn or?
Yep.
I got one on metformin, and I think this is a reference to the recent paper. Does it really affect male and female libido and fertility? I think the paper didn't look at libido. I think it looked at fertility, right?
They were looking, was it epigenetics of or that was the proposed mechanism, I believe.
Yeah, I don't remember, just lower sperm count or sperm quality, one of those parameters in men. And it wasn't dramatically lower, if I remember the exact results. It was just lower, and it was concerning because they thought it could be teratogenic. So I have looked into a lot of the chemistry regarding metformin. In my opinion, it doesn't seem to be a teratogen in general. So it's unlikely that that is the issue. It may be one, secondary cell signaling cascades that are causing a change, or just two, the manufacturer had contaminants in the metformin, and those can always be something that reduces sperm quality, sperm motility, whatever it may be the results that they got. So it's possible that even little contaminants, which have been found regularly in pharmaceutical drugs, can be an issue.
Yeah, honestly, I read the paper, and then I really don't have too much about that. I've been debating trying metformin for like the nutrient partitioning effects, but there's things like berberine. There's so many other things that mimic that, and personally, I just heard there could be some GI issues and this and that, but works great for some. So
yeah.
Let's see. Simple terms, the problem with excess
Iron deposition in tissues, right? Is that the question exactly? I don't remember.
I'm assuming just as simple terms, the problem with excess iron. I guess that means intake, which will then go to your cells and tissues. The first thing I think of is excess iron is one of the main risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And again, tying to the personalized medicine part of things, my wife actually has a mutation, hereditary hemochromatosis, which means she absorbs excess iron. She doesn't eat a lot of iron, but she absorbs every last molecule, not literally, but much more efficiently than the normal person. So her iron has always been very, very high her entire life. That's a huge concern right now? No. However, as we age, it's a really big risk factor for Alzheimer's. So doing things that you can do, a lot of people know it's incorporated into the heme group and hemoglobin in your blood. So you can donate either blood, or you can donate. It's called the Alex machine. You donate, it takes out the red blood cells and puts the plasma back in. You can basically clean out some sort of bloodletting almost to let out some of that excessive iron, but also just limiting no iron in the diet at all. And a lot of things are heavily enriched with iron. I've seen some things online where people crush up cornflakes and they pull out iron. You never know what you can believe anymore. I don't know if that's exactly true or not. I haven't done it, but I do know, like, I just got a big bag of white rice from Costco recently. Got the biggest one. I got home and I looked at it, and it's like enriched with iron. And then I'm like, well, I'm rinsing the this before I cook it for me and my, because I don't really think I need, my iron levels have always been good. So you could have mutations that let you absorb excess iron, and mutations that make you absorb too little of iron. So again, your body with that.
I agree with that 100%. I don't know what if I have any mutations, but I know from personal experience, I have been iron deficient at least one time, and that's when I was drinking way too much coffee, which is a chelator of iron, just prevents its absorption. But at the same time, they haven't really determined if it also chelates it from blood, red blood cells, whatever. But I got to the point where I just became really low in mood, motivation, and focus. And I realized I was dopamine deficient because iron is necessary for that dopamine hydroxylase enzyme, or tyrosine hydroxylase, I think, is actually the enzyme where it makes dopamine.
Tyrosine to L-DOPA conversion.
Exactly. So without iron, you can't make it. And as soon as I realized that, I cut coffee out for like a week. I started eating more red meat because obviously free iron is never really absorbable. But with the ferritin, the proteins that carry iron in general, you're going to absorb more. I felt instantly better. And so there's a dichotomy in like this Instagram health sphere of people have excess iron, you should liberate it, but then it's not that simple. It's some people have that issue. Some people have the genes for hemochromatosis. They probably do need to liberate the iron and get it out their body. But then there's people like me that don't really absorb iron that well.
And then also, I just saw another question here too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and stuck iron in tissues.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking of.
They're kind of very, very similar. I know anything you want to touch on that too. Or maybe we kind of covered the bases there, but.
Yeah, so hair tissue mineral analysis, I think, is HMT. It's HTMA, I think, was what she meant.
That again?
Hair tissue mineral analysis test, I think, is the test she's referring to. And it is a measure, but only of hair follicles, not necessarily saying how cells are utilizing iron. You have to have more than just one type of test to really determine what the biochemistry of your own body is basically telling you in regards to some of these nutrients. So there's not much I can input on that.
I think you're up now.
All right. Let's see. Potential environmental causes of Ehlers Danlos syndrome. Is it all just genetic? What do you think?
Until I mentioned this, we mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
All genetic. I do know that they do pretty well on CBD, which is suggesting some endocannabinoid related, similar. I think I mentioned a while ago, similar to like the autism type thing. So maybe there'll be some endocannabinoid dysregulation involved with that. But enlighten me, because I would think it's a genetic thing. Either you have those. Well, I guess real quick for people that don't know, Ehlers Danlos, it's a traditionally viewed as a genetic disorder where you have mutations in collagen genes. So collagen, there's many different types of collagen that make up the extracellular matrix. So your body isn't just cells existing next to each other. It's a huge scaffold of all these different substrates, whether it's collagen, cartilage, fibrin, all these different proteins that the cells then kind of nestle inside of. And that's what they pull on and pull themselves around in order to migrate around places. So that's what Ehlers Danlos is, mutations in those, which means they could have hyperflexible joints, very prone to dislocations, and I believe bruising as well. And there's sometimes their skin, they can literally just take their skin and just
insane.
And stuff, depending on the type.
Yeah, so I have a paper pulled up here right now on the types of Ehlers Danlos. There's classical, hypermobile, vascular, kyphoscoliosis, and more. And they all follow autosomal patterns of genetic inheritance, but some of them are dominant, some of them are recessive. So it could be based on the dominant or recessive part. Some environmental factors could be triggered. If you're past a certain age, I know that elastin production, what keeps the collagen nice and tight, basically goes down about 1% after a certain, I think it's 35 years of age. That could be a contributor to why the presentation comes only after a certain developmental period. The second thing regarding this is that the types of mutations are not just normal missense or nonsense mutations. You can have things like exon skipping. And so that might just change the way that the final protein is produced. And that makes it very difficult to categorize as only a genetic condition. But one of the things that I have personal experience with is that Lyme disease, because it is a collagen-specific microorganism, it burrows in through the collagenous matrix of most tissues, if not all of them. It basically causes rapid degradation of collagen. And if you lose collagen production, it takes a while to rebuild it. And it could present as Ehlers Danlos, or it could exacerbate Ehlers Danlos for a lot of people.
That's fascinating. I know you're really deep into Lyme. I know very nothing about it. I didn't even know that's the main pathology, is burrowing into and
that's how it causes the arthritis associated with Lyme disease. That's like the most common symptom.
That's usually the first presented symptom.
Yeah, the arthritis after the erythema and that ringed pattern. Sometimes people get it, sometimes people don't. Like 30% of people actually just get the ring. Most people don't get that ring pattern once they get bit by the tick. But it burrows into joints and tissues, specifically the knees, the elbows, the wrist, and it basically acts like H. pylori, where it's drilling into the tissue, removing the collagen. What reasons, I'm not 100% sure. And then I know that it also tends to enter red blood cells and also normal somatic cells and extract the glycogen metabolites. It's not the glycogen, the glycolytic metabolites. So 3-phosphoglycerate, I think is one of them. It's weird. And then this basically reduces the production of collagen because it's a glycolysis-rich process.
Yeah, I don't have anything more to say about that. You hit the nail on the head.
That's all I know on that.
I see 2 questions here. I'm going to kind of loop into one.
Sure.
The first being best way to treat ADHD non-conventionally. And the second question is nootropics claiming to be natural Adderall. Any thoughts? So regarding ADHD, it really depends down to the root cause for the ADHD. I like to view a lot of these diseases, whether it's anxiety or depression, or even lupus, for example, what flavor of the disease do you have? And by that, what I mean is you could have 3 people that all have depression. One person could have mutations in serotonin pathways. One person could have mutations in dopamine pathways. Another person could have mutations in autoimmunity. So this person has low serotonin, they're depressed. This person, this person has low dopamine, which could also present as depression. And then this person would have inflammation, very prone to inflammation, which can also reduce the production or suppress the production of serotonin and dopamine. So all 3 of these people all have depression, yet all 3 have different root genetic causes. And that out all the possibilities of epigenetics, of environment, of all these other things, of mold, or all these other things that could also cause it. Going back to ADHD, so the best way to treat it non-conventionally, I think first and foremost is limiting or removing inflammation, because as I said, you can have normal levels, genetics. You can have normal genetics for depression, but if you're inflamed all the time, it can actually cause resources, instead of being converted into serotonin, I believe it's kynuric acid, something with the K. And that can actually cause further inflammation and further depression. Nootropics claiming to be natural Adderall. Any thoughts? I'll tell you right now, people, I've been experimenting with biohacking. Nothing's going to give you that raw focus that Adderall does, except maybe metformin. I mean, these are incredibly, incredibly powerful psychostimulants that jack up your body's, literally your stress hormones, dopamine, norepinephrine. It jacks them up for focus, but also anxiety. So as we were mentioning, common theme here is limiting or reducing stress. If you're taking Adderall every day, no matter what you do to limit your stress, it's most likely not going to be enough, because you're on this drug that makes you dump excess stress hormones. And a big gripe that I have with Western medicine as a whole is, you go to the doctor, say you can't focus, they give you Adderall, they don't even know if your dopamine levels are even low to begin with. You can give any human being Adderall and it'll make them focus more. Not even if you just have ADHD, which is very problematic and frustrating. You don't know who actually needs it and who doesn't. I think it's grossly overprescribed, similar to the antidepressants. But back to the best way to treat it, it's definitely a loaded question to figure out which types of neurotransmitters you're deficient in, assuming inflammation is mitigated. I did a reel where I'm trying to do a biohack series to describe different ways that you could learn your own body and figure out, okay, if I take some L-tyrosine to elevate my dopamine, how will I feel on that? Most people, you dose it properly, you're going to have a focus effect, because ADHD means you have too low of these neurotransmitters in your brain. Nootropics claiming to be natural Adderall. It depends what you view as natural Adderall. What's your criteria for that? I mean, there's plenty of nootropics. I mean, you have the amino acid precursors. Is that considered nootropic? I guess technically. But you have things like the racetams, which activate acetylcholine signaling, which can definitely help with learning and memory. There's things like bromantane, which increases tyrosine hydroxylase activity. So you increase precursors through a different mechanism other than precursor supplementation. You have modafinil as well, which activates on, well, I guess, you know what, those aren't actually natural. So I guess we'll leave those last two out of but nootropics seem to be natural Adderall. There's definitely a lot you can do to enhance your overall brain function. But the most common I see with people is vitamin D, a proper B12 vitamin, and I just suggest everyone gets pre-methylated. I think the MTHFR, MTRR, a lot of these methylation mutations are pretty common, so it doesn't cost any more money. get a methylated B complex and methylated folate complex off Amazon. That in of itself can help a lot with ADHD. You may not need, why go for the Adderall when you could be missing out on simple micronutrients that could make you feel that much better?
I totally agree. I think you hit the nail on that. I don't have anything extra to input, but you mentioned the kynurenine, that amino acid metabolite from tryptophan, and that it's a so from what I remember about the pathway, it's tryptophan, serotonin becomes kynurenine, which can become quinolinic acid, or yeah, quinolinic. Yeah, one more time.
I thought it was still a precursor from serotonin conversion.
Or it could be that. I don't remember the exact pathway, but I do know that exact metabolite is one of the most looked at metabolite in things like Huntington's disease, and that it contributes to the pathology. So it would make a lot of sense in reference to that.
Interesting. Yeah, look at it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you are right with that. Yeah.
Oh, so it's serotonin, then becomes kynurenine, right? And then quinolinic acid?
Tryptophan. Yeah, so it is downstream. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like if the body doesn't use the serotonin, then it becomes kynurenine, and if it accumulates,
oh, so, so that's not the bad part. It's the kynureninic acid. That's the
exactly.
Yep. You had it right.
Yeah. So let's see. I got a question here. So this one's out of the blue, and this is like the funniest question I've ever seen. But the question is, I've just learned about the Large Hadron Collider. Would you guys be open to breaking it down?
Have fun with that.
Out of all the things.
That's all.
Man. All right. So just to go over really quick, in Europe they have this thing called the Large Hadron Collider. It's more for physics, for particle physics, and it basically speeds up molecules at really high speeds, almost luminal speeds, so at the speed of light, and clashes them together so that they can see when the collisions happen what kind of precursor particles or fusion particles are made, and what kind of forces can be discovered. So one of the things that they discovered from this was that out of the four fundamental forces, a strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetic force, which is the one that rules all of biochemistry, and then gravity, which itself is not really a force, but that goes into Einstein's general theory of relativity. That's how they discovered that the electromagnetic and the weak force were basically the same thing, but that it only diverges if you go past, or if you're below a certain temperature threshold. Basically, the Large Hadron Collider is the super particle physics machine that helps propel our understanding of subatomic particles.
I have zilch to say.
Zero. Okay. Okay.
Let me see. Please cover CBD. Is there any benefit, even though it's mostly polyunsaturated?
Mm-hmm.
So, first thing I'm seeing here is, so CBD would be a carrier. Well, it would be within a carrier oil, fat soluble, lipophilic. So, first thing to distinguish, you have the CBD and then you have the carrier oil itself. Mm-hmm. CBD molecule itself, I'm a huge fan of, as I mentioned before, and kind of tying into the ADHD stuff I mentioned before, CBD elevates something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or low Adderall actually spikes up BDNF. And when you come off Adderall, your body has very low natural levels of BDNF. That's part of the reason why you have such bad withdrawals. Think of BDNF as like gasoline for your brain cells. That's what can let your brain cells repair damaged connections to each other, or grow new brain cells in certain areas of the brain. So CBD, they've actually done studies in mice. CBD causes the growth of new brain cells in mice. So it's a neurogenic compound. Now, obviously the sourcing of it is what really, really matters. I suggest people take at least 40, 50 milligrams of it. Don't waste your money on those 5 milligram gummies. It's a marketing ploy. You know, they say you need at least 40 milligrams to really get a solid dose. On top of that, you need to use a trusted company or someone that you know is making it the right dosages. So CBD itself, is there any benefit, even though it's mostly polyunsaturated? I think CBD can be beneficial in virtually any oil. It's such a good anti-inflammatory. It helps grow new brain cells. It helps modulate the sympathetic, helps mitigate the sympathetic nervous system. But I'll let you handle the polyunsaturated.
So I have not seen anything about polyunsaturated in CBD, and I looked at a paper just now looking at fatty acids via HPLC. of the types of fatty acids that are in cannabis sativa, none of them are polyunsaturated. There's palmito-oleic, eicosanoic, oleic, caprylic, caproic. So these are all saturated and monounsaturated. What I think the person is referring to is that when THC gets metabolized, some of our own fats, I believe, get converted to anandamide, or if I'm saying it correctly, it's a byproduct of our own, omega-6 oxidation. That is what contributes to like the munchies from what I remember reading properly. But outside of that, there's no, from what I'm seeing, no polyunsaturated issues here. And the terpenoids and the terpenes themselves are what contribute to the fatty hydrophobicity of CBD. So I don't think it's anything to do with the CBD itself or the THC. It has to be the carrier oil.
I think you're up now.
All right, let's see what we got. I have one of my friends here, Kathleen. She's a physicist, and she would like more thoughts on lipedema. Do you have anything on that?
Not much. That seems more up your.
So from what I know about lipedema, even though it's presenting as protrusion of like the fat globules, the adipocytes underneath our skin, what the root cause is a degradation of the collagenous matrix, and so they're able to protrude. One perfect example I have of this is with balding. The scalp, the extracellular matrix, when we're balding, tends to tighten up and more elastin is produced. And so it has like that shiny share to it, but at the same time, there's less adipose tissue the more it becomes thickened. Whereas with lipedema, there's less extracellular matrix and more adipose tissue is able to basically protrude. And so by improving the extracellular matrix with things like MSM, sulfur-rich compounds, proteoglycans, L-glycine, things like that can all help with lipedema. At least that is my thoughts. It's less a fat issue, more so degradation of the ECM.
All right, so I got two I'm going to kind of loop in here. So are SSRIs, MAOI, or tricyclic antidepressants viable long-term solutions to depression? So SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They block the reuptake of serotonin into neurons after being released into the synaptic space. MAOIs, we mentioned that earlier. Basically, taking an MAOI would roughly make you, that could also make you more prone to aggression. Some of these people with the loss of function mutations, as we were touched on earlier. Tricyclic, I believe those are drugs that act more so on the norepinephrine system in addition to serotonin. Are they viable long-term solutions to depression? It depends. Shocker. So again, I mentioned those three different flavors of different types of depression. Now, some people, if you have a mutation in, let's say, if you have a mutation in the tryptophan hydroxylase enzyme, so you don't create enough serotonin, that would mean that an SSRI or MAOI may actually be good for you. However, I think everyone should always try, there's natural versions of these. For example, SSRI, St. John's wort is a natural SSRI. That is the main mechanism of action. MAOIs, there's so many supplements that actually are MAOIs, whether it's piperine, rhodiola rosea. I'm trying to think of things.
That makes sense.
So there's these other natural herb substances you could try that have the same mechanism as the prescription drug. The tricyclic antidepressants as well. Again, you don't know if you have a mutation in norepinephrine signaling. So the doctor know whether or not that's the right medicine for you. They're not checking your levels. They're not looking at your genome. So how are they going to know what flavor of depression you personally have? And on top of that, if you have a mutation in the dopamine pathway, they'll be increasing your already normal serotonin levels, which would mean you'll have all the side effects of excess serotonin, but you won't be addressing your low dopamine. So you'll have more side effects, but no real relief. But you may feel better because you're all numb. And that ties into the other questions, negative aspects of too much serotonin, which can definitely be a thing. Serotonin itself, yes, you need a certain amount in order to have long-term contentness towards life. You don't want to be dopamine driven, meaning short-term satisfaction carried on a stick over and over and over again. Periods of stress in our life where plenty of times where I look forward to an event and that helps carry me through things, but you want to be content with your overall trajectory in life. And having the right amount of serotonin is key for that. But having too much can definitely make you, too much serotonin would also mean too much precursors for melatonin. Serotonin gets converted into melatonin. So that can also happen. If there's excess serotonin, whether from supplementation or from drug use, like these antidepressant medications, you could constantly be having too much serotonin, which would mean too much melatonin, which could mean daytime melatonin. Since it's not following circadian secretion, it's based by a huge influx of precursor, ergo serotonin. It can make you kind of passive and I guess kind of that flatness. I mean,
Yeah.
that comes from the side effects of these medications.
Yeah.
Very flat because you're overshooting the serotonin. Now,
Exactly.
the dosages, the doctors aren't looking at, they're not even looking at your genetics to see what type of mutations you have in serotonin or dopamine, etc. They're going to look at your CYPs enzymes, your cytochrome enzymes. So some people can metabolize these drugs so much quicker or slower than other people. They've said there's up to an 8-fold range. So people that have the same weight based on their genetics might need up to 8 times. Person A that weighs 150 pounds may need 8 times the dose as person B 150 pounds, just because of their genetics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that body weight has much less to do with drug dosing than it does your genetics or cytochrome enzymes. Negative aspect of too much serotonin, as I said, you can be kind of flat and overall passive, and you need a certain amount of stress in your life. That's what people sometimes forget. Yes, your cortisol's high, but I take ashwagandha. I don't want to do anything because I'm too chill. You need enough stress to get out of the bed. And there's another question here: how to get out of gosh darn bed in the morning? It's similar to that. What are you doing the night before? You know, are you smoking a shit ton of weed or taking an edible, which is going to make your cortisol go lower and possibly still be in your system? Or are you taking too much melatonin, which is something I think people really overdose? Your body produces 0.3 milligrams of melatonin per night, roughly. So they sell 2, 3, 5 milligrams. That's over 5, 8, 10, 20 times the dose of what your body actually needs. But that also ties into how you metabolize it.
Right.
I have a mutation. I metabolize it fast. My wife metabolizes it slow. I take 1/10 the melatonin dose she does. And I still wake up groggy sometimes in the morning. And she could take, I'd be out for 3 days off this dose. And she wakes up totally fine because her body just chews right through.
That is fascinating to consider, especially when it comes to the serotonin excess. I've seen somebody mention over here earlier, but Ray Peat said serotonin is no good. And what Ray Peat discusses in regards to serotonin is the overproduction, which triggers a serotonin syndrome-like state, which in specific he calls, and they're calling it learned helplessness, where you basically give up on life. You have apathetic states, you're anhedonic, and you don't want to do anything to improve your life. The only way that it improves is with more cortisol signaling, but then with cortisol and serotonin elevated, that's a recipe for biological disaster. So that's really interesting to consider as well, the metabolic cycle and the different mutations in the CYP enzymes. I don't know. I think you hit it on the nail with all of that regarding SSRIs, but I definitely think that there should be more genomic-based approaches to personalized medicine.
And yeah, it's just one of those things too where not everyone always has, I'm not saying you would exactly fix everyone's issues if you knew what all the genetics were, but some of these major, very prevalent mutations that can explain why you are, your personality, why you are who you are, but also the possible ailments or chronic diseases you have throughout your life.
Yeah, that is really good to know. I have a question here regarding nicotinamide mononucleotide for aging parents. Have you heard about the NMN research, NAD+, B3, anything related to it?
So I'm going to be on longevity. One of my goals for this year was to learn more about longevity. I followed some of David Sinclair's work, definitely showing promise. However, a lot of it is mechanistic data in mice. There's not a whole, this isn't saying I don't believe in it. I just think some people, it's similar to the fasting phenomenon. While there's a lot of benefits to fasting. I know, like, for example, fasting reduces the egress of inflammatory monocytes into your bloodstream. Like, that's great. And I fast, I feel good, but that doesn't mean that it's a be-all, cure-all for everything, per se. Right. But I know that is it NMN or NAD that's related to the sirtuins?
NAD plus. NMN helps promote higher NAD plus level.
Okay, so that's upstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from what I know, it is looking at it from a metazoan perspective. So just a cell as it used to be in almost prebiotic times. NAD plus, a lot of chemists have developed some in-depth understanding of how NAD plus was made through alpha keto acids. And when it was made, it allowed the cells to basically rapidly proliferate and divide. And so that was the metazoan cell as it was back then, basically a cancer cell. And cancer cells also use a mutation in the rate catalyzed enzyme NAMPT, nicotinamide phosphoribosyltransferase, to increase their own NAD plus level so that they can replicate and divide rapidly. Without NAD plus, the cell does not return to a youthful state, as evidenced by the cancer cells. So if you increase NAD plus levels, your cells will kind of respond as such by returning more to a youthful state. Epigenetic changes are produced, which is downstream of the elevation of sirtuins. That's what I know from it. And NMN does seem to do that. But like you said, Sinclair's research is mostly on mice. Obviously, he can't just take human beings, but we take what we have. And I would not use NMN for this. What I would use specifically is just niacinamide, because you need B3 for other purposes. It is not just NAD plus, but the precursors to NAD plus are still essential for like the conversion of tryptophan to serotonin and so on. So that is my input on that. But yeah, NMN seems to be useful for aging people. I just don't know how effective, like you mentioned, it could be or it is.
Yeah, I think on top of that, I'm not too sure with NMN, but I know I looked into using NAD, and a lot of them, it's a newer supplement, and it's I'm younger right now. I'm 29. I'm not young, but I'm not old. And I know it's very, very expensive too, and the data's not there quite yet. So for me personally, to take that, I spend enough money on supplements and all these things.
Yeah.
So really hard to say, but that's interesting what you say. That's the same one with the floosh, right? Like
So that is the niacin itself. So niacinamide has the amine group in there, but
that makes Interesting. Let's see. Can you explain how animal liver is okay to eat since it aids in detox with toxins? And then there's another one that's very similar. Explain the idea being promoted that some. Oh no, so that's related to carnivore, but a different aspect. Okay, so we'll do the animal eat since it aids in detox, laden with toxins.
Right.
So the liver's job itself would be to filter the various toxins. So I think they're referring to the toxins actually being in the liver if you're eating raw. If you were cooking it, doesn't that ablate a lot of the beneficial effects? You mainly do want to have it raw. I just know that look at it per gram of tissue. I've been saying I still haven't had liver. I keep wanting to incorporate it. It's one of those things I haven't gotten to do that yet, but it's super, super jam-packed with so many different vitamins and minerals. I know a lot of B vitamins, copper especially, which is really good for allergies. The enzyme that clears histamine, the main cellular mediator of allergic inflammation, is copper, the cofactor. So having a copper deficiency can aggravate allergies. Me, I supplemented with copper. It helped a lot with my allergies. Are they laden with toxins, Pedro?
From my understanding, when the liver metabolizes certain compounds, it tends to store it in fatty tissue. The liver is not a very fatty tissue at all. It's mainly hepatocytes and then some Kupffer cells, which are the immune cells. It can be stored in those cells, but I believe the amount is just minuscule. I think what the problem is are pro-carcinogens, where they become carcinogens after the liver metabolizes it. And if you eat them, well, then you're getting that dose there. And if it is in the bile ducts as well, which when we eat liver, we still eat the cystic ducts that come out of the liver, it could be that you have some detrimental compounds in there. And I would say the only way to really mitigate it is if you sourced from a good farm that took good practices with their cows and made sure that they were healthy. And then you don't have much to worry about. But I have never really focused on the toxic aspect of it. It could be.
I honestly did not know it stored the toxins in fatty tissues, so that's new to me.
Yeah, that's the endocrine disruptor side of things. Why we put on visceral fat with the more endocrine disruptor exposure. They store it in the adipocytes.
That makes sense. I think you're up now.
All right, let's see. I think I got one more question on this, and it seems to be by your wife. And she's asking, how are you so beautiful? You want to answer that for yourself?
Living as stress-free of a life as possible due to living with my wonderful wife, you know? So
That's a
look,
good answer.
just, you know, everything pops a little bit better.
Wow, that was smooth, man. I think that's all on my side. Do you have anything else you want to go over?
One more. I know you could definitely talk for hours about this,
Okay.
but one thing I think we do need to talk about, explain the idea of being promoted that some plants are deadly via carnivore / hearts. Is that
Heart and Soil? That's his brand.
Yes, yes. So I'll give the preliminary thing. I'm sure we can do a whole thing just about this.
Yeah.
This knows, I don't know if you're up or below me on their screens, but you know a lot about this stuff. But it all depends. It depends on what molecule it is and what the dosage is and what your genetics are in the metabolization of these things, as well as how you break down the actual individual phytochemicals themselves. Some people could have impaired metabolism of, I don't know, X phytochemical, and that could accumulate more, so they not do well on this specific type of vegetable. Like me personally, I'm super, super allergic to peas. I didn't know that.
There's a guy here talking about peas too earlier.
But big bad time, you know, allergic to peas, but yo, I can't help it. So like that's actually having an allergy to the pea. It's slightly different, I think, from what they're saying, but fiber has been directly correlated with so many beneficial things. The short chain fatty acids that are feeding the Tregs within your intestines. They're starting to show that meat can do that also, but go with what's evolutionarily consistent. Yes, Carnivore MD always says seeds are highly defended, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And thing is, I don't think the whole message is wrong. I think what you see a lot with the influencers nowadays on Instagram, it's got to be highly polarizing and highly bombastic in order to get any press is good press, especially when it comes to Instagram influencers. So plants, I don't avoid them. I know which vegetables and fruits do well with me. I actually got a different bag of smoothie fruit for my smoothies, and it had pomegranates, cherries, and something else that I don't normally have. And I had it and was super inflamed at the gym. So now I know, I think I'm allergic to pomegranate. I don't know for sure. I'm not even going to go get allergy tested again because it wasn't on there. But like, I know to avoid that. And fruits, they're not highly defended using that methodology. So.
Yeah, you can break this down into a number of constituents. We can break it down into plant secondary metabolites, which are the toxic compounds they produce to defend themselves. We could break it down to unnecessary plant compounds because our biology doesn't require, like fiber. And we could break it down into the plant biology in terms of the reproductive cycle. Do we eat the seeds or not? The seeds are always found in fruits, and they want it to be eaten so that they can reproduce and so on. And we're basically the organism that helps them reproduce by eating the fruit, throwing away the seed. These are all aspects of it that can be discussed. But if I can just focus on one, which seems to be the secondary metabolite issue, there is always a real concern with plant alkaloids and plant-based polyketides and all of these different compounds that they produce, because they can be very deadly. They can cause DNA alkylation events which basically induce a perfect mutation event, a nonsense or missense or an indel. But the thing is, the dose matters. And in small doses, it does trigger a hormetic response that increases our own endogenous antioxidant responses. NRF2 increases, glutathione production increases, and so on. And they are proven useful. They're medicinal compounds and should be treated as such. But to harp on it and make it polarizable, I'm sure it helps Heart and Soil. I'm sure it helps Carnivore MD. but it doesn't help the average person.
Yeah. And the quick fact, you know that NRF2 is actually tied into BDNF signaling?
I did not know that, actually.
I was telling you before, we were talking about the aldehydes and everything like that.
Yeah.
NRF2, BDNF, all. So basically, any of these phytochemicals that are promoting NRF2 signaling would likely be good antidepressants because
That's interesting.
the BDNF downstream. But I wonder, do we have? I know that I saw a couple of questions in here. Maybe we could run through quickly. I know one I definitely wanted to address. One of them was, well, I guess we also saw it here. I think it was. Oh, why is Western medicine so bad? Why hasn't it improved? And I think someone, I don't even know how to scroll up here. This is my first time doing the live, but someone was asking something about what do you want to see changed about the healthcare system.
Yeah.
So kind of what I said initially, my overall, I guess, credo or passion or mission, the one size fits all doesn't work. People are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Like just being handed a pill. The example that I given before, you have depression. The doctor, where do you live? Are you getting sunlight? Have you taken magnesium? Or knowing your individual genetics. Now, there's different ways you could slice this. Do you think everyone should be sequenced at birth in utero? I see arguments for that because if you really double down on this technology, you could know, for example, who's going to have a more severe response to possibly vaccinations. You could basically filter out people that may have worse responses to certain healthcare treatments. But the counter to that I definitely see, though, then based on what we said, you could also see who's more likely to be aggressive or who's more likely to be a serial killer. So there could be a slippery slope with that. But I just think bare minimum that personalization is everywhere in cancer therapy. Personalized immunotherapies where they look at instead of sequencing your cells, they sequence your cancer cells, which are highly mutated and have different DNA from the host body cells, and they pick medicines or therapies that attack whatever the crutch is of that cancer cell's genetics. So if we personalize cancer treatment, why don't we personalize everything? And obviously, I'm sure you can all tell throughout this, I'm super passionate about the mental health side of things, and that, at least from my experience, seems, I don't want to say easy to help or fix. Easy isn't the word, but for a lot of people, you could just get sequenced and see, oh, I metabolize dopamine too fast, or oh, I produce serotonin too slow, and you could just take a half a penny a day supplement for the rest of your life versus be on SSRI. So overall in healthcare, I want to see your genome being put on the pedestal and driving healthcare decisions, but also I want to see that that's being done for reactive therapies. I want to see that brought towards
psychiatry
optimization along the way. So you're happy, inflammation-free your whole life.
Yeah. The only thing I can input on that is I sympathize with a lot of physicians because they have constrictions.
Yes.
They can't do certain things or else they will lose their license. If they try to speak out, they may lose maybe a day or a week of work. And then the other problem is that they're only bound to certain therapies because of what insurance covers for most people. And so it's a difficult slope for the physician because they are the mediators of the patient and the appropriate response for that patient. There's not much that can change unless the background stuff changes, like insurance companies and hospital administrations, all that stuff, which is more business and regulation oriented than I can care to focus on, and know much about. So that's all I have to input on that.
Oh, yeah, and I kind of pick up what you're saying, too. I guess I should have prefaced with this. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Mm-hmm.
No, it doesn't mean that, are there some doctors that, if you've been practicing medicine for 10, 20, 30 years, and you've been helping people from your point, you've been helping people, and someone tells you, oh, now you got to completely rewrite the playbook and learn all this new genetics, personalized genomics stuff.
It's difficult.
Their career, why are they going to do that? And my brain comes from the scientist side, PhD versus an MD or DO. What is optimal? What will actually work? But it's not just about what will work and help people. It is what will be approved large scale and what is covered by insurance. So like you said, it's not, I'm sure there's some bad actors in being
Like
physicians.
anything.
Any career path. There's also some great ones that aren't even DOs, that are MDs that really,
Yeah.
heart and soul into it. But you can't blame the doctors themselves. I think that med school training, PhD training, grad school training, I think they need a complete, huge overhaul. I mean, how much papers do we know about how circadian rhythm disruption screws up your health? Yet in med school, it's like glamorized. Like, oh, I had to suffer, so you had to suffer too. That's not how it should.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned here, why haven't they implemented these things yet? What's the darn holdup? Science moves fast, but it also moves incredibly, incredibly slow, especially when it comes to large-scale clinical regulatory laws.
Mm-hmm.
So
if most people knew how much you need to go through with an ethics review board for a single study, they would kind of get the idea of why.
yeah, and it's hard on that end, yet also, not to go conspiracy here, but, there's a lot of conflicts of interest regarding I do think there's somewhat truth in a patient cured is a customer lost. That doesn't mean that every person involved in big pharma or the healthcare system, that's not the case. But a lot of these big companies, they've had some really bad lawsuits and stuff they had to settle for purposely, mis-selling, misbranding, under the table stuff. So,
yeah. Don't hate the player, hate the game. And the game will shape the players. And people just have to have wisdom to discern who are the good players, who are the bad players.
And that's also why my mission for my page isn't just to throw some crazy science at you, but also try to educate you. You're not going to be able to understand like a PhD does or an MD, but knowing your body at least. So even if it's like you're going to get a new pre-workout powder for the gym, you're looking and you're seeing, oh, L-tyrosine. Dr. Tyler Panzner told me that's a precursor to dopamine, but that could also make me anxious, so I'm not going to get that one. That's just a very watered down example, but just knowing the basics on what you put in your body and why you're doing it. Because again, a lot of these physicians, healthcare people, it's not that they're not interested in your health. It's just they have to see so many patients. Every year, doctors have to see more and more patients per day. In a 15-minute visit, how are you possibly going to check all the boxes? So your health is in your own hands, guys, but you have people to help you. But investing and educating yourself about the basics of health will pay dividends, in my opinion.
All right, man. I think this is a good place to cut it.
It flew by.
Yeah, 1 hour and 40 minutes roughly. Insane, man. But I'm going to save this on my page and hopefully you're able to save it on yours.
Yes.
So people can reference.
Fuck it up right now. I do there. Let's see.
I think it's like when you exit and then it gives you the option to save. So right before the next part. So as soon as you press that X button, then it should give you the option.
Okay. All right. Well, bye, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. And Pedro, thank you for teaching me a couple.
My pleasure, man. Likewise, my friend.
All right.
Likewise. That was fun. I'll catch you later, man.
See ya.